right. We are at the top of the hour, a couple minutes after, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. If we have not met before, I am Drew McClellan, co-owner and CEO of Agency Management Institute. Super happy to have you here, and super happy to have Kathleen here. We are in month 4 of what we originally talked about being a 6-month series. We'll see if we decide to extend it out, but a 6-month series of looking at how agencies are using AI. If you're not familiar with Agency Management Institute, we're an organization that recognizes that most agency owners are accidental business owners. They're really great at the client-facing work, but for some of you, it never occurred to you that you were going to own a business. And so things like HR and finance and biz dev and some of those, you didn't go to school for it. You've been kind of doing it by hook or crook, maybe super good at it, but a lot of times people are looking for best practices and they don't know where to go. And that's really what Agency Management Institute's all about. And so it makes perfect sense for us to host this because there's probably not a hotter topic on the planet inside of agencies right now, other than biz dev, which is always the hot topic, other than how we can leverage AI inside our shop. It is a huge topic of conversation at our conference, the agency conference that we do every year called Build a Better Agency Summit, which is in May 21st and 22nd in Denver. So if you don't know about that, feel free to put something in the chat and we'll send you some more information about that. So today, though, I just want to welcome Kathleen back. So Kathleen Perley, agency owner, sold her agency about a year ago, is now teaching at Rice in their MBA program about how AI is changing the way businesses conduct themselves internally and externally. And so when we combine her AI knowledge and her agency owner knowledge, comes together in a really beautiful way in this webinar series, looking at how agencies are leveraging AI. And I'm super excited about this topic. We've been talking about external things in the first 3 sort of episodes of this series. And Kathleen and I talked and decided that this month we would turn our attention to internal. How are we using AI internally? And so with that, Kathleen, I am going to one more time mute everybody to make sure that I've got everybody. And then if you can unmute yourself and you are now, you now have the comm, if you will.
Perfect. Well, I'm super excited for today. I know we've typically have to try to put a 5-pound bag of flour into a 3-pound bag in these sessions because there's just so much to talk about. And I'm so excited and passionate about the topic. But I've tried to trim back a little bit today. So we'll see how that goes. But feel free to type in the chat any questions that you have as we go along the way through some of this stuff. And I think Drew set us up perfectly when we talk about, what AMI really stands for. And I think this is so true. And I was one in those shoes too, right? I started my own agency in 2013 at the age of 24, thinking worst case scenario, I can live off of ramen and mac and cheese and PB&J for 6 to 9 months. Like, we'll see how this goes. And so most of us are accidental owners, right? And so when I think about, even when I went and made the decision to sell, part of that decision process was I didn't enjoy the operational side of everything that I did. I didn't want to have to deal as much with HR or IT or policy work or any of that stuff. I really wanted to be a visionary. And so what I've kind of compiled today is some ideas in terms of how to utilize AI to help create efficiencies in processes, how to take some of that stuff that you might not enjoy off of your plate, and some tools that I think are really helpful. Because if you're anything like me, right, we didn't get into owning our own agency because we were super pumped about writing policies for every imaginable thing possible or dealing with HR or IT issues or things of that nature. We do it because we really love the work and the strategy behind the work. So when we think about today, I'll kind of talk through a little bit of how to identify AI opportunities within your operational process. Talk about how to utilize, I've identified 10 of my favorite tools that I use on a regular basis to help increase what I'll call like operational efficiencies. How to use it to help cultivate engagement with both. I really focus more on the employee side, but this can really be done as well on the client side. And then we'll talk about how you can innovate onboarding to help reduce that burden. I know Drew always talk, right? We are sometimes very slow to hire. And then we think as soon as we hire that person, life is going to be easy in 3 weeks or 2 weeks. And we all know that that is not true because of the onboarding time. And one of the mistakes I made as an owner oftentimes was I didn't have enough middle leaders in place. And so I was responsible for a lot of the onboarding. And when I got busy, those individuals weren't really set up for success and they weren't really helpful for a lot longer because of that. And so I want to give you some ideas on how do you help those individuals get up to speed faster and how do you help them really hit the ground running so they can actually start taking things off your plate. And then we'll close, since last time we really focused on how to build custom GPTs. I've identified 3 custom GPTs, use cases, and what the knowledge base would be. So we'll talk through some of those so you can kind of implement that as well. So when we think about the opportunities, one of the things I've done was identify the top 3 most common types of projects that we had in the organization. If you use any type of project management system, which if you don't, this is a good plug to maybe start thinking about project management, especially as AI becomes more relevant, you'll be able to use that data very helpful, like to really help run your business in the future. But we would export those into Excel. And what I would do is I actually created columns that identified, okay, because our philosophy as it pertains to AI, at least for now, is AI will not take away jobs, it will take away tasks. So if you keep thinking about how AI can help your operations or your process at the big global level, it might become overwhelming and you might miss some really easy wins if you don't take it down to the task level. And so what we did was we exported our top 3 projects from project management system. And we actually looked at every single task and we went through each task and we said, okay, can AI assist with this? And if so, what is the AI tool that we would use? What notes should we include and how much faster, right? So what would be the estimated time? Because we used to have estimated time for like if a human did it for every single one of our tasks. So what is the new estimated time if AI does it? And so I think what really helps with that is it actually helps you start to see the efficiencies that you'll create that might create more bandwidth on your team to do other work. Or quite frankly, one of the things I found, especially when we got busy, is we stopped thinking about ourselves, right? And we all understand, especially now, our pipelines are slow from opening to closing. And so having that team's ability time to go back to those other pieces is really helpful. So I'll send this to Drew as well so that you guys can have it. But I created a little template which just kind of gives you an idea. But honestly, if I were you guys, if you have a project management system, just start there and add new columns in. But what I would do is like industry research, the estimated time, 5 hours for a human to do it, estimated time with using AI, 2 to 2.5 hours, possibly even less than that. We would typically use Perplexity and ChatGPT. We would use Perplexity first to identify the sources and then use ChatGPT to help us synthesize and pull out some of the additional facts. And so this is something like as you go through your process, and not every single task or line item is going to be able to be infused with AI, but this really helps you identify where the opportunities are between those. So once you kind of do that, that's a really quick way to think about, you know, as you how works moves through your agency, where you can find those efficiencies. So when we think about kind of that larger scale, I identified my top 10 favorite AI tools for the use for operations. I think there's one that's a repeat, but everything else is net new from our AI tool workshop that we did, I think, on the second week of the series. The first, you know, keeping the same key. So as I mentioned before, the pricing key on the bottom, you know, $1 sign for the least expensive, all the way up to $4, and this is per month. And then we have some data as it pertains to security. The first one that I absolutely love is Perplexity. So Perplexity is an interesting research tool. Think of it as like your new Google. And it's interesting because they are actually utilizing a lot of Google's mapping and schema to present their data. But what it really does is it actually allows you to, and you can see in this example, you can ask a question like, how does shuttle diplomacy work? And then when you hover over these kind of notations, it actually will pull you to those sites so you can understand where it's pulling all that information from. The other really nice things, it's not only pulling real-time data, it's actually leveraging scholarly journals and articles. The funny thing is, obviously, Perplexity has started to take some of the market share away from Google search already. Gartner just came out and they're predicting about a 25% decrease in search traffic overall by 2026. And literally, I think last week, Google is starting to roll out in select environments their kind of generative search engine results pages or interface. It used to be in their tools or their labs where you could kind of see and interface it, but they're now starting to slowly release it to catch up to firms like Perplexity because they were starting to lose market share to them, which is fascinating. And there's even conversation. Sam Altman gave an interview 2 weeks ago, and there was conversation because Bing is starting to do some of the similar work. Will Bing become the new powerhouse, and is Google going to go by the wayside? And it'll be really dependent on. Yeah, it'll be really dependent on how their generative search experience goes. And I think the challenge is, right, when Perplexity launched, or even, Bing has had it out for about a year within their platforms. And so when it was first rolled out, everyone understood it was new. There were going to be some challenges, but I think expectations have just gotten higher. And so there's a lot more risk of failure for Google in this space, but Perplexity is amazing. It's free. You can pay for the pro version. It's not necessarily secure, but it's a research tool. And I really love it because it also gives you those follow-up questions and it gives you those site sources, which is awesome. The next one, this is the one that's a repeat, but this is Scribe AI, and this really focuses on the ability to screen record your computer to develop documentation. So if you're going through your processes as an agency, you can kind of talk through it as if you would like a Zoom meeting, and it actually will transcribe and insert screenshots of your mouse movements to help really navigate and help people guide through this process. It also will help obscure information if you have like client names, things of that nature, so you don't have to worry about any of that. And creates these even GIFs within it, so you can kind of see where they need to move. So as we think about, even as somebody who sold my agency, one of the questions I got was, what's your documentation? Do you have these resources available? Because if, God forbid, you got hit by a train, would we still know how to run the business, right? This is a great way to do that. And it's actually interesting. One of the thoughts I had recently is, every time that person gives their 2 weeks notice, we always figure out, what are we going to do with them? We can't pull them in on new work. How do we manage them? This would be a great exercise for anybody who's leaving a role, because it's hard, right? If you get 2 weeks notice, I might not be able to hire fast enough for you to train them. But what I can ask you to do is utilize Scribe to start building documentation in terms of what you used to do to help when I bring on somebody new. So Scribe is something I'm a huge fan of. Their technology is really great. And this can become a learning source for any custom GPT, which is awesome and helpful.
I will also say one of the challenges for many of you is that you think you have an agency-wide system or process to do something, but really what you have is an agency-wide system or process that may have been communicated verbally or written 12 years ago or whatever. And then every employee has added their spin to that system. And so a lot of the work you do is Drew's way of doing it, or Babette's way of doing it, or Kathleen's way of doing it. And so this is a good, even if you think you're well documented, I would challenge you to use a tool like this to redocument your systems and processes, and then compare it to A, your old documentation, and B, how your people are actually doing it, so you can come back to an agency-wide system and process.
Yep. And one of the things that I've been thinking about doing and looking at, right, is if you do this work, right, you could take the documents that are developed, turn them into PDFs, upload them to your custom GPTs within Microsoft, right? And then it could become an assistant. So if anyone has an issue during the process, they can reference and have a conversation with the chatbot to understand, okay, hey, what am I supposed to do when we get this type of project? And they will actually pull information from the documentation and even link to it to help that individual, really figure that out, right? I think part of the reason why people kind of vary the process as things go along is because they don't know, and they don't want to take the time. They don't want to take the extra time to figure it out in terms of talking to people and scheduling things and trying to find the files and all that stuff. But if we take away that friction, I think this becomes huge. Yes, I can send the link to Scribe AI. This next one is called POTUS. This is a AI HR training mechanism that'll also do some types of assessments. It'll look at behavioral interview questions. and provide you like real answers based on your mission and values in terms of like qualifications in terms of certain job types, as well as like cultural fits and things of that nature. They've done a lot of work from trying to help remove some of the bias. This has been an issue, obviously, in some of the more recent AI technology pieces. And what we've seen so far is that it's really helping lower the hiring costs by optimizing this screening process and improving kind of the job description quality, doing the custom assessments, and things of that nature. So you can see here, this is for a lead product designer. You can see the skill tree, and you can ask, based on their resume, what their technical skills are, the product management, leadership skills, and they'll kind of give you a score out of 10. Strengths and weaknesses. And so it really helps you kind of identify who you want to be interviewing with, and then also really help you to prep for those conversations, which I think is really valuable from that standpoint. The next tool is something I really love. It's called Detangle AI. Now, this is one of those things, right? I feel like in the AI world, we're evolving very quickly, right? So Detangle AI is, I think, a really great tool, but one of the interesting things is that you can upload legal documents to ChatGPT, you could utilize Claude 3, Opus, and get really good summaries and answers and things of that nature. But what I really like about Detangle is you can actually upload your documents, and it'll talk to you about like the favor score. So like, who does this favor? Does this favor the agency or the client? So it kind of gives you this favor scale analysis. And then it actually helps you prompt some questions to have or conversation around with your attorney. So this isn't meant to replace attorneys, but it helps us, they bill by the hour. This helps us walk into a meeting with our attorneys in a much better position to have like real conversation.
Definitely. Can you give us an example of what you might do with this, like a specific example?
So I'll give you an example. I worked with a really big client, and obviously they had an MSA that was probably like 37 pages. And I was like,
got it.
Oh, okay. I have no idea. And obviously, if you looked at that favor scale, it was heavily favored to the client.
Sure.
Whether it was favored nation clauses, all these types of different things. And so I think it's, especially on the account team, right? It's very easy for them to be like, oh, yes, we'll sign it. We'll sign whatever you need us to sign. But this really helped me have a more educated conversation with the client. Sometimes I wouldn't take it to an attorney. I would just take it back to the client first and ask some questions like, is there wiggle room on this or that? But it was really helpful navigating those pieces. Or even when you go to sell, right, the purchase sale agreements, things of that nature. I mean, the purchase sale agreement was, I think, 150 pages. So it just really helps summarize that. And I just love the feature of the favorability. And then here are questions to ask your attorney. Like, here's the summary, and then here are some of the questions that you should be asking, which is really amazing. And it will pull out also like monetary challenges, right? So this might have a monetary impact and help you understand some of those pieces. The next one is Stamply. This is a AI-powered AP automation, which is really interesting. As an agency owner, I always struggled with accounts payable and making sure that we received everything we needed to. And so what this does is you have this AI, they call it Billy the Bot, which I think is kind of fun that each of these AI tools come up with these like fun personalized names. But what it does is it really takes all of your AP process work and really kind of streamlines and eliminates a lot of like the ERP work in terms of like identifying like what GL, like, what general ledger you're going to attach this to, things of that nature. It'll do all the coding for you, make sure it streamlines the approval process. And the nice thing about it is it attaches all the notes to the invoice and manages all vendor onboarding information, documentation, helps with your compliance. And it does integrate with QuickBooks. So this is something to look at with that. The other thing I would say is as things continue to evolve, QuickBooks is starting to kind of start releasing their own AI features within them, like their tool themselves. But this one was something really interesting. I know a couple of my students in my business class have been using this tool and really love it. And it has significantly saved them a ton. This other one is called TaskAid. So this is really a AI-focused native project management tool. It actually helps you customize your templates for various projects, helps streamline creation and that content generation side of it. It will help you write your task. It will also do custom. They're working on, it's in beta, but they'll do like full agents. So it'll do your research, task completion, and all of that for you, and then have you review it. So it can do multi-step processes for you. They already start with a bunch of templates enabled already. And then the other things, it helps you do summarization of documentation as well. So this is, if you're don't have a project management system already, this is one to look at. If you have one already, I found that I'm starting to see some of the historical main players in the space start to evolve their AI technology. And it probably makes more sense to integrate through APIs than to kind of move project management systems. But this is a great one if you don't have one yet, or you don't need as robust of one. This is kind of really nice because it kind of automatically starts to think about the next steps and making sure we have everything you need. Glean, this is think of this as like your company wiki. And so it really does a lot of work as it pertains to like engagement processes and helping people get mentions. It'll do a full knowledge graph and understand how content and knowledge is connected across your organization. It allows to really create an easy searchable index of all company knowledge. It will create personalized viewports for each individual based on their role and their experience. And then the other interesting thing that's really great is it does help with data governance. So we were on Confluence as an organization, which they're a little bit slower to integrate some of the AI technology that's coming out of ChatGPT and OpenAI. But Glean is a great tool to look at for that piece of really kind of a company wiki, which is fun. This other one, Book AI, is another AI technology in the finance space. This also integrates with QuickBooks, Zoho Books, and Xero. It does some really great stuff with transaction categorization, fixes. Those enhancements makes it a little bit more efficient. We'll do some of your reconciliation on your behalf. It will utilize AI to extract data from bills and receipts, which is super helpful. I remember I hated doing Amex reconciliation. This would have been insanely amazing. And then another nice thing is it helps detect issues with discrepancy in the books and making sure that it's completely accurate. And, I would tell you the Stampfleet is more enterprise. This is a great tool just to start with. It integrates with QuickBooks. It is super helpful. And even as you start to delegate that to a controller or a bookkeeper, having this technology to help keep those checks and balances in place are really valuable. And then I think the other nice thing about this tool is it will provide suggestions and be an assistant for you. So even as it comes into tax purposes and things of that nature, it's super helpful. Not that this replaces any tax advisors, but it helps you have your materials ready, have the right conversation with those people that you would trust as your advisors. Motion AI is a tool. I haven't used it yet, but I am actually starting to look at that as I make this next transition. I am ADHD and I am the worst when it comes to time blindness, right? I always will get into the weeds on something. And if I absolutely love it, I will wake up 4 hours later and be like, oh crap. But what Motion AI does is it actually helps personalize your schedule based on your calendar and your tasks that are coming in. So it integrates with a number of different tools like Gmail, my Outlook, things of that nature. It also integrates with your project management system, and it'll help do task prioritization. It'll help motivate you as things are coming closer and closer to getting missed. And if you are an agency owner like me, we just love that dopamine chase of that last minute rush from that standpoint. But what it's also really nice is it helps combine my personal and work calendars into one master calendar.
Oh, wow.
Which is nice because one of the things I always struggled with was, that's a great question. I'll come back to that when we get to 10. So I really like that because I am, right, I end up being all in on work or all in on personal. And I oftentimes had always felt like my family and my kids kind of got the worst part of me because I was, by the end of the day, was lost my executive function at that standpoint. So I think, this is something really good to explore if you're like me and have struggles with that. The next one is Dropbox Dash. I do not know. I mean, we use Dropbox as an agency. Since the sale, we've moved to Microsoft. So we're switching that. This one's really interesting. And one of the things I really like about this is my least favorite thing about any type of work was trying to find files. Like, remember that campaign we did back in 2016, that cardiovascular one for XYZ client? It was impossible to find things, right? Like, I hated the fact that I would spend 30 minutes trying to find any file. So what's interesting about this, it's in beta. So if you have Dropbox, there's no additional charge to use Dropbox Dash. But what you can do is you can actually interface. This is what it looks like. You can ask it questions. It'll actually show you previews or summaries of the documents. So you don't even have to open them fully. And you can kind of create this like centralized dashboard. We'll even integrate with your other tools and things of that nature. But the thing I love most about it is its retrieval process and ability. For you to be able to like find files that you're looking for. It even will integrate not only just from Dropbox, but even into your email. So if you're like me and you're like, oh, I left it on my hard drive, but I emailed it to the client, but I don't know where it is. This would help those challenges in terms of making sure we're saving things in the right spot. And last but not least is feedback by AI. This is kind of fun because you can kind of, as a CEO, I always found like I felt really kind of lonely in terms of I have these ideas, but I didn't know who to talk to about them. Or I was having a bad day at work and I made a decision that somebody didn't like, and I kind of got an earful. So feedback by AI is really meant for startups, but I loved it in the sense of being able to talk to it and be able to say, like, you can actually define the persona. So if you want to be challenged, you can be like, act like a troll and tell me why I'm wrong here. Or you can be like, I'm having a rough day. Be nice to me. Tell me these things, right? So it kind of gave you feedback on things that you were doing or decisions you were trying to make as a CEO. That I found really valuable, and it's really inexpensive and just kind of a fun. So this is more of a fun one. But I think, if you were a founder, sole founder, you don't have a partner, it was kind of nice to be able to have that. And I use it now too. And I decide on the day whether I need like uplifting encouragement or I want something to be challenging me on my thought process. So those are the 10 tools. Literally the prompt is like, act like a troll and like destroy me. And I will say, right, I am very much so as an organization, we are focused on, and one of the things I advise people on is like, you should streamline and consolidate as much of your tools as possible. That being said, there are certain things that are just not quite ready. And what I'll call, because I think what we're moving towards, right, is there's the big three: Gemini with Google, OpenAI, and ChatGPT-4. And then you have Anthropic Claude 3, which was released a couple of weeks ago, right? Those are your big three. But there are certain things and it's slowly getting better and better at like everything. But there's still a challenge in terms of like the financial stuff, right? It's not integrated into QuickBooks right now. So when I talk about these tools, these aren't in order of my preferences. But I will say, you can probably tell which ones are my favorites. I think play around with them. A lot of them offer 2-week free demos. Some of the times what I'll do is I'll use these tools for 2 weeks in the free demo and then try to understand how the technology is working and then recreate it in, through an OpenAI assistant or a ChatGPT or through Claude, and understand that. So these are not in order of preference, but I would say explore some of them. Perplexities, just think of it as like a new Google. So some of them aren't necessarily things that require cost. But that's a great question. So when we think about all these different AI tools and what the potential means for our organization, I think leveraging AI for employee development is huge. One of the things that I've found is I struggled a lot with performance reviews in terms of writing them for other people, right? Because I would just forget. We would have these one-on-one meetings. I had notes all over the place, some handwritten, some on a computer document, all over the place. And by the time I was like rushed to get them all done, I would forget about some of this stuff that we had talked about, some of the wins, some of the challenges that they're bringing up in these one-on-ones. So as we think through the new AI technology, and I did this recently, right? I kept everything in one document, like a Google Doc, and then I uploaded that plus my like grading criteria, like our template for performance reviews. And I asked questions of it and tried to ask for examples to be given to me based on my notes from my one-on-ones with this employee. And it was really, really helpful. Now, I will tell you, I still had to edit it to make sure it sounded like me. But after that performance review, the person told me it was one of the best performance reviews they've had. And it probably was because it pulled in all of our notes and it leveraged AI on that. And so some of the things that you can do when you upload these documents is, ask about, based on our discussions, what types of products does, X employee seem to be really excited about? What are some of the commonalities so it can help us find trends? I've also used it to ask questions about like, what are some of the common challenges? Because every week we always talk about like, what are some of the wins? What are you most excited about? What are some of the challenges? Those are some common questions we ask every week. And so it provides some notes for me in terms of, okay, there seems to be a consistency. They have a challenge getting it from like this stage to this stage, or they have challenges of like getting buy-in from their team, things of that nature. And then also I've had it used it a couple of times to help me kind of push and understand professional development. Because one of the things I always ask in our one-on-ones is, where do you want your career to go? And I oftentimes will ask ChatGPT, based on our current job description and kind of some of these interests, what are some ideas for professional development for XYZ employees? So this is a great way to kind of become that superhero manager. And I think this is not good just for CEOs and agency owners, but for even early managers or new managers as they're trying to navigate this. So that's AI and performance reviews. Other applications of AI in employee operations is to leverage AI to help build job descriptions. I don't know if it was just me. This is obviously important for every new hire that you have, but I oftentimes had job descriptions that I just never actually wrote, or I wrote it and their job changed significantly over time and I never took the effort to edit it. And one of the things that I found in my 10 years of running an agency is if you don't have clear expectations, they're never going to succeed. And having that job description is like the core piece of that. So AI is great at writing job descriptions. So use it. And when I say AI, I'm telling you, like, you can use Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude 3, like any of those tools. It's also been really good in writing interview questions. I'm interviewing somebody later this week, and I always struggled because I like to talk, which is not surprising for anyone on this call, probably. And so interviews were easy for me. I'd always talk to them and I would get out of every interview and I'd be like, I like them. Let's hire them. Like I like hardly ever had a bad experience because I just like talking to people. But what I found is if I upload the job description that we had for the position, the candidate's resume, it helped me ask more poignant questions to identify if they were going to be an actual good talent for the role versus me being like, talk to me about your favorite project. Talk to me about something that didn't go right that you enjoyed. It really helped me be more specific. And the interesting thing is I did this in one interview recently and the person was like, you really took the time to like look through my resume and understand my LinkedIn and blah, blah, blah. Like, I really appreciate it. I didn't tell them that I used AI to do all of that and it didn't really take me any time, but it did make them feel more special. And I know the job market has softened a little bit, but you have to consider, if in certain roles, it's still as complicated or competitive as it ever was. So even just the experience of every candidate matters. So definitely use that tip. It's been incredible for me. Yeah, I had AI check their LinkedIn. I uploaded the resume, the job description, and gave them the link to the LinkedIn. And with every single one of the big three, you can do that and be able to get that information. The next piece is identifying trends in employee surveys. I think it's really hard as a owner and a CEO, and I had issues with this. I would start reading employee feedback surveys for the organization, and I would get caught on like one comment, or I couldn't see through the noise of like I was very looking at it individually and not at scale. And so when we ran quarterly employee surveys, poll surveys, this will really help identify the trends and really help, I think, from an emotional standpoint, get you out of the weeds. If you were like me, I was wearing hat of CFO, HR, ops, sales, right? I don't really want to read every single little comment because sometimes it was hard to read. And being able to do this at scale is super helpful.
So it also would allow you to see the trends rather than, like you said, get caught up in a word or trying to guess who said what, right? I think a lot of people spend a lot of time going, well, I know who said that, and either dismissing it or giving more weight to it than perhaps it deserves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been, and you can use, I mean, some of these tips, right? We talk about them from the standpoint of employees, but this is also great for client surveys, right? You can use the same strategy for client surveys. You can use this really as well for client onboarding. We talked about this in our last sessions. We talked to custom GPTs. This is super helpful. So when we think about onboarding, I think the first step is to create that documentation. So utilize Scribe to create that documentation. That is one AI tool that I think is very, very useful. And then you can have it help create, right? I remember every time we onboard somebody, my goal was to develop a 2-week plan where I basically outlined every single thing that person would do for those 2 weeks with their meetings and all that stuff. But it was really challenging at times. And so what I did was, you can use AI to help you write and develop those, help you kind of get some of those questions on that. And then the other thing is,
hang on, Kathleen, I'm going to mute everybody and then you have to unmute.
But it's like a creative, maybe.
Okay, unmute yourself.
And it looks like this slide didn't update, so I'll send you the updated ones. But documenting your process, using that process to help you write those first 2-week plans. And then the last thing is, if you create all the documentation, you can move it into a custom GPT, like an onboarding assistant for any new employee. So as they have questions, right? And not just for the first 2 weeks, but I remember, there's so many people where you're going through the onboarding process and they're like nodding their head. They're like, oh, yes, this makes sense. And, they're moving along. But a month later, somebody asks them a question about something and they don't even know where to go. So this is a great way to kind of create all the documentation and then use it to really create this AI assistant that you can leverage for anyone that's going through onboarding or even, quite frankly, across the board. So the last piece that we'll cover is, what are some of those custom GPTs, not just about onboarding, but just overall that you can leverage to really help make the life of an agency owner a little less painful. And I feel like as an agency owner, I sometimes go through all of these emotions in one day or an hour, depending on the week. And so these are just some ideas in terms of things that we've looked at in terms of custom GPTs. So one is a policy development. It is actually really fabulous at helping draft policies. That's one of the things I hate the most. So in this one, you could have it guide on HR policies and best practice. It can create employee manuals. If you don't have one, this is a great way to start with one. Revising workplace rules, compliance advice. AMI has done a great job. And one of the things I loved about AMI and my peer group, shout out to Drew's favorites, is the sharing of these resources, right? Like I would be like, hey, we're going to launch a remote work policy. Does anybody have anything? And people would share. And oftentimes I'd be like, find, replace agency name with this agency name, right? But it didn't sound like us and people were kind of tell. But what's nice about this is you can actually have, say, create a remote work policy covering, team communication and availability norms. And you can use existing HR policies, compliance needs, and your mission and values documents so that it really sounds like your own organization. So that is one of, I think, the huge assets that AMI has helped me out with over the years is helping build some of these documentations. But now I can take those and then up it a little even more by making it sound like something our organization would write in our tone. The other one is what I love to call the org process GPT. And so this is an idea that's a chat GPT or chatbot that helps answer employee questions as it pertains to onboarding, process adherence, initial guidance on where to go in a process, right? as Drew said, right, you start a process and you think everyone's following it until you realize no one's following it. Everyone has their own version. So what's really helpful about this is it actually would help ensure that as people get stuck or not sure in terms of what's next, they could turn to this chatbot for support or this AI assistant for support. So you would upload. So if the question was like, how do I kick off a web project or this type of project? It would kind of give them directions on how to do that. And you could upload things like job descriptions, project templates, FAQs, and time tracking guidelines. So this could be super robust in terms of like, how do I track time for this or that? And I include job descriptions because one of the things I found and I would even include job description / org chart, is as we've grown and as we grew, right? One of the challenges people are like, who do I go to for this, right? Like, who do I go to if I need a resource for this or a question on this? And so I think this is something would be extremely helpful. And then the last one is actually utilizing AI to help with cost cutting analysis. Obviously, we have our formula, that we always try to hit, 25, 50, 20 area in terms of revenue. Drew's shaking his head. Is that roughly right? 25,
55, 25, 20. Is that what you're looking for?
55, 20, 25. Yeah. And so when we think about that, right, like one of the things that we can do to help us hit that mark, and oftentimes if you're like me, I never wanted to touch the employees. So I was always trying to find other ways.
Right.
Is you can utilize AI to help go through and streamline cost and create operational efficiencies. So you can use it to help identify spending audits, budget realignments, resource distribution, things of that nature. And you can say, analyze cost saving opportunities in my Amex report. And you would upload some of your financial records, your process mapping, and some efficiency manuals to identify like, hey, you have this reoccurring charge for these tools, or we've identified these things. So you can go back to your team and say, are we using these tools or this being done? That kind of stuff, which is really interesting. So these are just a few custom GPT ideas for operations to kind of help kind of lighten that load as an agency owner who wears probably more hats than just CEO. But with that, I will turn it over to questions.
Look at that. Time for questions. All right, you guys, either you can unmute and ask your question if it's longer, or feel free to type it in the chat if that is more efficient, and then we'll go from there. So Kathleen, I think one of the questions was like, how do you cherry pick the right one? So in this set of tools, if somebody's like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to use all of these tools. Is there a way in your mind that you would create a hierarchy of them?
Yeah, I mean, Perplexity and Scribe would be my top two. I use those a lot. Depending on if you have a bookkeeper or not and where you stand on financials, I would look at I think it's called Bookie, this one, yep. Book AI. I mean, those would be my top three. And then I would go into probably like Dropbox if I already had a Dropbox account, things of that nature.
Okay.
So those would be, my top three would be Scribe, Perplexity, Dropbox, and this Book AI. Now that might just be for me because I hate accounting, which is why I put it at the top. And I haven't found, yes, I can upload stuff into certain LLMs to get answers on certain things, but I don't get really great results in terms of it actually being more of like a full agent and it kind of running like simultaneously with my bookkeeper and me just being able to like look in and check on things.
Okay. So somebody's saying, is there an easy way for them to find links when they're Googling some of these tools? They're getting multiple links.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll update this deck and I will hyperlink all of the names so that you guys can easily find them.
Okay, perfect.
Because there is a lot of, I think, multiple names. So I can definitely do that.
Okay, awesome. Other questions? Curious if any of you are using any of these tools, or are these all new to you? So you see Jeremy's question about, oops, sorry, Greg popped in first. They're using Workamajig. Is there a way to point an AI tool to all that data for people to ask questions? I think that's one of the challenges is if the if the source software doesn't allow for integrations, you almost have to export it out into something that does.
Yeah. And that's not to say it won't change.
Right.
Um, so it's great. And yes, I am using AI to help give campaign results and look through Google data. Um, we do have updates in our contracts MSA as it pertains to utilizing AI to evaluate data, marketing data and analytics from the campaigns that we're running. So we do disclose that to our clients. We do have the enterprise account, but the team as well will have that moat and kind of protection on that side. Obviously, if I'm running campaign data, for us, I'm in healthcare, or I was in healthcare, so it's PHI. So if there's no PHI, that's typically their main concern. And we tell them that we're utilizing it to help everyone, and identify trends across the niches and the industries that we're serving. It's really good at doing the data visualizations. One of the things that I found is it doesn't replace your media analysts or your digital analysts or analytics team members. But what I found it helps with is I'm a visual person. And sometimes if I can visualize the data, I then know which questions to ask or where to poke further. And so oftentimes I'll ask it for insights. It does a decent job on some of the insights. Some of the insights I'm kind of like, meh, obviously that's a comment, we've set up the campaigns that way. So that's why you're not seeing that. So you're seeing that trend. But it does a great job of helping to see some things like seasonality, which somebody mentioned in here, which I think is really great. As well as hypothesizing on certain types of predictions and things of that nature. So for example, if men or women, things like that is super helpful, right? So if you look at this from a subset of men versus women, does that change the statistical relevance of this? And it'll tell you kind of understand of that. I use GPT, advanced data analysis on some of this. I've also used Julius AI, which is really great. I found that Julius AI is more robust in terms of its ability to do more statistical math and data, kind of data science. But I'm seeing it goes back and forth between the two. So those are the platforms that we're using currently, is mainly ChatGPT. But for my business course, I have my students using Julius, but they're doing evaluate the, we're looking at how would you do evaluation based on this, using this hypothesis with this much standard deviation, run it 27 times, which you probably aren't doing for your average marketing and advertising campaigns. But the other ones we're using ChatGPT, and we're using advanced data analysis, which is now called, advanced data analysis, formerly known as Code Interpreter.
Do you make your own custom GPTs then to use that? Because I still find mistakes all the time. So I feel like you still need somebody that can look at data and be actually, no, there wasn't an increase in March. That seems wrong. And be oh yeah, funny, then it'll kind of talk and be you're right. And then if you know what to look for, you can spot the mistakes. But I find it super helpful too.
Yeah, so that's why I actually like Julius a little bit.
I've never used Julius.
Julius AI. I actually know the owner or the CEO, founder and CEO. Okay. What's really fascinating about them is their whole philosophy is that it's all done through Python, and it actually shows you the full Python scripts as it gives. So it'll run the full Python code and help you, so you can actually see the math and the equations that it's doing, so you can identify if there's an error.
Yeah. I always ask for the equations too, because I know them. So I'm let's just make sure we're on the same page.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why the custom GPTs could help you, I guess, get to that area instead of trying to rebuild it from scratch every time.
Yeah. And you can say show your work and things of that nature.
Totally.
Now, with Julius, I typically we're doing, I'm give me 1,000 variations and then find me the average, mean, and median if we're doing forecasting stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more scale, I found. But it's been really great. It's actually being heavily utilized in healthcare as it pertains to research, for biomedical research, because they have a ton of researchers, tons of data, but they don't have a lot of data scientists to help analyze that at scale. And so they're using it pretty heavily. And and it's a wrapper. So it's leveraging Claude, Opus, as well as ChatGPT. And so
Awesome.
for certain aspects, it knows that ChatGPT is better than Claude, and other ones Claude's better than ChatGPT. And so it's kind of
Mhm.
different between those, which is interesting.
Okay.
I agree. I think somebody just mentioned the Opus. I agree. I think it's really impressive. It did beat out, I think, last week. There's a kind of an assessment that's done on all the AI tools, and Claude Opus outperformed ChatGPT 4 Turbo for the first time, marginally. And so I think right now, technically, Opus is the leader right now. But we are expecting a new release from ChatGPT by the summer, if not sooner. I think this news will help them expedite that release since it's been out a year since we've had ChatGPT 4. So yes, play around with Opus if you're interested.
So I'm curious, just in the chat, which one of these tools are you most excited to actually use? Which one are you like, oh my God, I'm going to use that today? If anyone has made that decision. And feel free to ask another question if you have it. You're just stunned at the choices.
Stunned at the choices.
So a couple scribes, a couple custom GPTs.
Perplexity.
Yeah, Perplexity. A lot of people are loving Perplexity.
Yes.
Yep, nothing wrong with the lowest hanging fruit. Agreed, Joyce. Yep. Yeah, I think a lot of people, because it was the rage, everyone was talking about ChatGPT. It's sort of the gorilla right now. But it's interesting as agencies start to use some of these tools, how you're starting to parse out how you'd use different tools for different things. And Perplexity seems to be gaining ground. So I'm having more agency owners talk about how they're using that one.
Yeah, I use Perplexity a ton.
Yeah.
I actually always have Opus open, ChatGPT, Turbo, and Perplexity open at all times. I found Opus seems to do a little bit better understanding my voice tone and writing things in my tone than ChatGPT 4 does. But the crazy thing about this world is, right, when this summer or May, when they release the new or June, whenever the release of ChatGPT, what I'll call 5, because I don't know what they're going to name it, is going to be pretty impressive. And then everyone's going to swing back to this other tool. So I definitely recommend, like, my thought process has always been like, have our organization on one of the big 3s and then have one license on some of the others, just so that we're constantly experimenting and we have standard prompts that we're constantly testing just to see where it's moving. Yes.
All right. Any other last minute questions? Our next gathering is, hang on. I should have looked at this before, but of course didn't think about it. Looks like May 7th at noon Mountain Time. So we'll send out the information, we'll send out the links, but just know that basically the Tuesday before Mother's Day is our next gathering. So any last minute questions before we let Kathleen go? How do you develop and codify prompts? That's a tiny little question.
Yeah, so I have like a running, like I have a stored document, and kind of every time there's a release, I have standard prompts I use on a regular basis that I just constantly use, that I kind of know what I expect from it. With typically one's like an article summarization, one is some type of generative piece, another one is more focused on more of like a mathematical or data analysis. I typically tend to do like a schema prompt as well. And then I have those prompts I always use. And then I know it's kind of sounds silly, but even in the tech world, and I've, through my RISE teaching, I've kind of gotten an even better connection is this sounds crazy, but you kind of have like what I'll call like, they literally use the word like vibe check. to see if you like the responses, right? Some of them, they're like clearly wrong. Some of them are like, I have a personal preference to how this responded to this, and I think it did a better job. The truth matters, neither one of them is wrong in terms of GPT and Claude, but I think this tone sounds better for me in terms of what I'm looking for. And things of that nature, which is good. Oh, there's so many great questions. And I will say I'm going to be at BABA as well in Denver. I think we'll be leading, I think 1 or 2 roundtables on that. So if you were on the fence of going and want to nerd out with me, come, because I would love to nerd out and chat about this more.
All right. Any last questions real quick? We're almost at the top of the hour.
I think
All right.
Rob-
We will see you guys in May. We'll get this processed in the next week or so and get out the link so you can show it to your team or you can review it again. Thanks as always for joining us for these. Hopefully they're super helpful. Would love to get your feedback on other topics that you'd like us to talk about. We're doing some discussions and talking about some different things that we're going to be doing with Kathleen into the summer and fall. So watch for that as well. But we're grateful that you're here. We are happy to be helpful, and we'll see you guys next month. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.